we were kind of light with the invitational. We'd love you to move forward, but now we have to go a little bit more with, we actually only put the Post-it notes that you need on the first few tables. So if you can all shift up to the first 3 rows, if you haven't yet, that would be great. And Dr. Tortorelli is currently handing out the articles that we're going to need today. While she is doing that, we'll just make sure everybody's in the same place. Thank you, Laura. So everybody who's in this space, you're here to think about how you can do your coaching work around curricular resources, right? Everyone wants to be in here for that? Yay! We're still, all right, Laura and I are gonna try and make this. We know that it is the end of day 1, and you're probably all pretty exhausted by now. I always say, like, this week is so exciting. It is coaches camp, but it's the cognitive load that you have to get through for this week is pretty heavy. Thank you for moving up close. This is just going to help put us all together. And here's the good news. This group of us, we're on a pathway for the whole year. So you really want to get cozy and really get to know each other, because we're going to be working together all year, not only this week, but continuing on. Each time that we meet at a quarterly, you'll be able to meet with colleagues around this topic. And honestly, we're going to be looking for your brilliance and be doing a bunch of these things together that everybody can utilize. So thank you very much for being so amenable, even if it's really against your will, to move closer. I never mind sitting in the front, but I have friends who are like, I am always going to sit in the way back. So thank you if you are a back row person who just was so flexible to move up front. And thank you, Dr. Tortorelli, for handing out resources. So how are we feeling? Is everybody at a table that has access to an article and a rubric and Post-it notes? If you, oh, not the rubric, I'm so sorry, that's tomorrow. I'm ahead of myself here. There's an article and Post-it notes.
So there might be extras that need to pass between tables.
Okay, if you have an extra coaching article, excellent. You can pass it on back. Awesome. All right, I'm glad we have your laptop. I didn't bring mine up here. So do you want to, I'll let you talk a little bit about yourself. I'm going to pass it to you now. Okay.
I'll let it set a little bit.
You can start whenever you're ready.
Okay. Are we using these mics, or does it matter which one? Is it this mic or this?
Oh, you can use whatever mic you feel.
Okay.
Like.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? Okay, fantastic. Hi, everybody. Once again, I'm Dr. Tortorelli at Michigan State University. I'm really excited to be here with you today and the rest of the week working on coaching around curricular resources. A little bit of background. I obviously am a professor, an assistant professor. Associate professor at Michigan State University. So I've been working with the schools in Ingham ISD, in particular East Lansing schools, really since I moved there and got to know the fabulous teachers and literacy coaches there. And last year, I got to serve as a volunteer on our curriculum selection committee for new reading resources. And this is something that I was doing outside of my day job. I thought I was just going to be like a mom on the committee, kind of like participating. And I realized that this was a whole untapped source of research, and it intersected with my day job all the time, right? So we spent a whole year as a committee selecting a new reading curriculum, and I learned so much from being part of that process with our East Lansing literacy coaches that when Annie and I talked about what we wanted to do for our curricular pathway this year, we realized that there's actually quite a bit of support that literacy coaches put into choosing and implementing curriculum that we wanted to really dig into that work with you today and the rest of this week and the rest of this year. So I'm excited to be here with you. I don't know if Annie needs any introduction. I think we all know her pretty well. So I'll go ahead and give you guys a chance to turn. I'll let her talk when she comes back up. But go ahead and turn to your table. Like Annie said, we're going to be working together for a while, so you want to start to get to know each other. Introduce yourself, your name, your role, and why you chose this pathway. All right, and now Annie will introduce herself and do the same thing. Who are you, and what's your role, and why are you interested in this curricular pathway, in this pathway?
Well, hopefully you've all had a chance to chat with each other. I think you all know who I am, and I don't know, though, if all of you know that I formerly was an ISD early literacy coach. And so if you didn't know that, I have been in your shoes. I've done the work that you've done. And so part of the work Laura and I will do with you over the next few days is we'll be sharing some examples. And so I know how hard that job is for you. And it's something that I loved doing. I have the privilege now of doing this work, but I do miss being with teachers, and you still get to do that work, being with teachers and kids. So we hope that the work we can represent for you today will help you feel empowered, but also let you learn from things we've encountered in the field. Like, I'm constantly learning from my mistakes. So, these are things that we are passing along to you.
All right, so we did our introductions. We have not done our movement activity.
Okay, so I used to teach first grade. So before I moved to Michigan, I was a first grade teacher in Massachusetts for 8.5 years. And so we used to do a stand-up, sit-down interaction so we could get to know each other and just see who's in the room. And so if you're online, you're gonna just use that cute little thumbs up, emoji so that people online can see that. But if you're in here, you're gonna stand up if this relates to you. And so, okay, let's see. Okay, so yours in the coaching network. So if you are in your first year, please stand up. Okay. Look at this, all veterans. If you're less than 3 years in our network, excellent. Okay, great. So this is good to know. Awesome. If you are more than 5 years in the network.
What is exactly for?
I'm not sure exactly for. Okay, there we go. Well, Okay, so we know who's in the room with us, right? Who's a 4-year person in the network? I feel like we don't, please stand up. We cannot exclude you. Sorry. Okay, we're punchy. It's the end of the day. So we have our 4-year members in the network. Oh, Lord. Okay, so experience with the number of ELA reading curriculum. So you're using like a whole basal series, basically, that they sell you a curriculum and if you do this, you have everything you need, okay? So if you've worked with 1 to 3 of those types of curriculums. So for example, when I moved to Michigan, it was a reading first school and we had a reading street. I've only ever worked with one basal. Myself as a teacher, I've only ever worked with one, so I'd be standing up. Okay, so 1 seems pretty. 1 to 3 yep. Seems pretty normal. 4 to 6. Has anyone had to do 4 to 6? Okay, so this is really.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. Okay, wow, that's a lot of curriculums you've had to go through. Right? Maybe you're just such veteran teachers. How about more than 6 whole curriculums? Virginia said more. Okay, and Rebecca. So. That's a lot. So we have a lot of experience in this room that we'll be able to pull from with whole curricular resources that people, you have the promises of this is everything you'll ever need, right? And this will be your magic bullet for everything you need. How about involvement in the curriculum selection process? So, oops, sorry, I meant to go back. So who has been involved in the curriculum selection process? So if you've done that, you can stand up. Yeah, and I should be raising my hand too. We're already standing. Okay. So a lot of us have done that. Excellent. Okay, how about you've done training? You've been trained in a new curriculum. I mean, I have too. Yeah, right. So, okay. Almost unanimous. And you've trained others in a new curriculum. You might just keep standing. Okay. All right. We have a lot of experience is what this is telling us in this room, right? So a lot of collective experience. How about maybe you've developed instructional materials or curriculum yourself? Brilliance is in this room between all of this experience. Okay, and our last one, if you've participated in coursework or professional learning in curriculum design. So maybe you have a degree in curriculum design, or you have it, wow, okay, excellent. Look at this, yeah, what? I say stand up. If you think it counts, I'm counting it. So there's no judgment. If you believe that, so. Okay, so this tells us we have a lot of collective experience, which is great because we're going to be in this space together for the next year and leveraging all of the assets that you're all bringing to this space with one another and then learning from and with each other in this process that we are in. Okay, do you want to talk about our agenda? I'll let you do that.
So for today, we're doing our introductions and we're talking about why we are here, starting with a grounding in the essentials, defining our shared terms so that we can make sure that when we're having a conversation about curriculum, we know what it is that we're talking about, that we're all talking about the same thing. And then we're going to provide some examples from my experience working with East Lansing Public Schools this past 2 years ago, and Annie's experience. And we're going to try to connect what we're going to do in this work to things you've done in the past, and then start creating and building our community for this year's pathway. So we're going to start each day, with some, I'm sorry, we have to advance here to see our notes, but then we have to go back and forth. So try to remember, if I forget, just wave. So we're going to start each day by strengthening knowledge, starting by introducing and reinforcing some things that you already know from experience, and introducing some new information from research as well. And then we're going to work through some examples and then spend some time connecting in community and working in small groups. So we want to start with thinking about why we are here, why we decided to form this. Basically, we are in a position where there's a lot of social media pressure on schools to make sure that they are in alignment with the science of reading. And in lots of states, there's legislative pressure as well. So there's a reimagining and re-looking at what we're doing in schools, and curriculum bears the brunt of that. But teachers and students are still in pandemic recovery, which is also increasing the pressure that we place on them and our curricular materials to sort of come up with quick fixes and solve the problems. There's also been a lot of funding available since the pandemic, and much of that is going into new curricular resources being purchased in districts to support that pandemic recovery. And so as a result, there are a lot of districts adopting new curricula and materials. Actually, we just went through one phase of that with the Read by the Grade 3 law. We're kind of going through a second wave of new curriculum adoption. But even in places where that's not happening, many districts feel like they're stuck with old materials that don't quite meet where they're supposed to be, what they're supposed to be doing. They don't really meet the moment. And so there's a lot of innovation and supplementation happening, even in places where there isn't brand new curricular adoption. And this is a tricky subject for teachers. Many teachers have had really negative experiences with having new curricular resources chosen for them. Many of them, if you go all the way back to Reading First, have some some fidelity hangovers when they think about the curricular materials and the way they are expected to work with that. And a lot of teachers just feel like every few years there's something new, right? Every few years they get a new thing and they're supposed to do the new thing. And so working with teachers around curricular resources, either new ones or ones that they've had, can be a real challenge for coaches. So we're going to be working through these next 3 days with an anchor text, which is on your table. This is an article by Sharon Walpole that focuses on how curriculum and coaching have to work together to support student achievement. I know everybody here knows Sharon Walpole. She is fabulous, and I know that many of you have already been working with her differentiated reading instruction book as one of those supplementary resources to support Tier 2 instruction. And so she, in this article, will go over some of the lessons of Reading First, talk about positive models for curriculum coaching, highlight equity as a major piece that is sometimes overlooked in curricular coaching, defining and choosing high-quality instructional materials, and presenting us with a theory of change and enabling conditions that can allow materials to be uptaken in a really positive way. So I'm going to start by just previewing the article. You'll get to take it home and read it tonight. But some of the major findings that she highlights from our last experience with big nationwide curricular changes are from the Reading First era. Does anybody remember the Reading First era? If you participated in the Reading First era in some way? Yeah, so there was that sort of like now, there was this big push to get reading instruction right? To focus on fundamentals, to make sure everything was evidence-based, a lot of really strong emphasis around word reading and phonics instruction. And once all of that settled, like all the dust settled, and we had really high quality studies that looked at what happened as a result of Reading First, we found that Reading First was successful. All of that money and all that time and all that attention and all that Strom and Drang was successful on certain criteria. It was successful at getting specific curricular materials and intervention materials adopted. Yeah. It was successful at increasing teacher professional learning and emphasis on professional learning and teacher knowledge, which is a good thing. It increased the use of school-based coaches, which is a good thing, and that increased the time spent on reading instruction. Unfortunately, what it did not increase was the quality of that reading instruction overall. Obviously, in places that did increase quality, but overall, we did not see a big change. And we didn't see a big change in student reading achievement, especially at the comprehension level. We did see some improvements in word reading and phonics, but ultimately, we were not moving the needle for student achievement. And so that means we need to pay really close attention to how we are doing what we are doing with curricular materials now. We cannot just throw things at teachers or throw money at classrooms and expect there to be changes. In fact, what Sharon Walpole argues is that you have to have coaching support, teacher knowledge, and the curricular materials all aligned and pointing in the same direction and supporting each other. And that's the way that a change in student achievement will actually happen as the result of curricular changes. So there's also been extensive research on what coaches were doing during Reading First and have been doing since. I know Dr. Wright presented this morning what you do, right? So none of this is about you specifically. This is more about nationwide, and obviously some of it happened in the past. But basically, there's research that shows that coaches are involved in choosing or developing curricular resources, developing a collaborative framework for implementation, supporting teacher flexibility and adaptation for the student population and the local conditions, curriculum training and professional development, co-planning, co-teaching, modeling, observing lessons, analyzing and interpreting student data to see if change is needed, and in some cases, not as much here fortunately, actually doing the intervention and teaching the lessons with working one-on-one with students. So this is a lot. You're involved in every stage of the curricular implementation and adoption process. And it's a lot of hats. So we wanted to give you a chance to kind of think through those different roles and experiences you've had and put those on the table. So we're going to do a turn and talk. You don't have to describe all 5 of these things, but you can start, but thinking about one experience you've had coaching teachers on specific curricula and materials, thinking about whether it was positive or negative for you and for those teachers. Think about the hats you were wearing. What kinds of role and what positionality did you have in regards to that curriculum? What things made it positive or negative? And what could have helped make it better? So if you're in Zoom, you can choose a number and type your answer into the chat. If you're at a table, you can turn and talk and share with your table.
Okay, is there anyone that has an example that you might want to share? Because Dr. Tortorelli will be coming around with the mic. Is there anyone that really wants to share an experience that sticks out to you that's in one of these numbers here? Anyone still feeling excited? Afternoon time?
Yeah. This is a lot of talking over here. You sure? You guys were...
You'll share. Thank you, Bridget. Okay, there goes Laura.
One of the things that we talked about was this notion that we don't want our teachers thinking that once they get the thing, right, the curricular resource, that magically everything's going to be solved, right, that it's about so much more than that. So when part of our role, we work with district teams that are working to, that's why I stood up so many times, to adapt the curricula, right? And so we've seen all of those things. And so that's one aspect. And then the other thing we talked about, and I don't know which question this would go to, but that our beliefs drive our actions. And so regardless of what the curricular resource is or isn't, if it doesn't align with what we believe, right, at the end of the day, teachers are maybe going to still close their door and do what they think is best because it's what they believe, regardless of the noise that's coming out in podcasts or whatever those things might be. So I think it's our job as coaches to help people kind of sift through that noise. And I think the essentials can help us do that, right? That can help ground us in the work because they are the science of reading, right?
Yes, they are. Thank you. We did not pay Bridget to say that at all.
I've been saying it a lot because we're helping a lot of districts adopt materials. Like just in the last 2 years, probably, what would you guys say, 10 or 12 of our districts? I mean, we are in the biggest county, but.
Right, but I mean, I don't think that, I mean, how many of you stood up, right? They're in the process of adopting a new series or at least a resource. And so exactly what you spoke to, you know, there's that piece of cognitive dissonance that we've talked about a lot in our network. There's also confirmation bias, right? So if you're really into something, you're going to find more places where you can get confirmation of what it is that you believe. And so in great news, we do have the essentials.
That the essentials are actually not a curriculum. That was a misconception. We also make the point that curriculum, so we wanted to be sure to address curriculum. That was a misconception that we had encountered in the field, so we wanted to be sure to address it in this updated version. We had encountered in the field, so we wanted to be sure to address it in this updated version. We also make the point that curriculum material.
Okay, this is just how it's going to go right now. I don't know. This is actually, it's really good that this is waited for the end of the day. I thought this is how it's going to go all day for me today, so I'm pretty excited it didn't start this way until now. Okay, so it's been that kind of way. So I think, Jason, did you actually maybe figure out how to, you don't know where that came from either, okay? All right, that's all right. But you know what? It's because Dr. Duke really needed to have presence with us right now. And it's like, you know, this power that just came into the room. And in fact, I was just going to speak about her. And so there she was, already speaking for herself. But one of the things that Dr. Duke did was record these videos for us. And one of them that she did was about robust resources. So we're going to have her speaking about this new section in the Essentials document about robust resources, right? And that it's quite important that we do have robust resources. So this was another piece at the task force when we met and we talked about, again, it wasn't all that we were saying at the task force was important, but we actually put information out to the field in a survey and asked for feedback. And the feedback said, this is something that would be really important if there's research on it, which there was, that we should have robust resources. But as coaches, it's a really difficult job to be able to negotiate how to support schools and like really negotiate the belief systems and how we're going to really get through like the noise, like the social media that Laura spoke about, right? Like there's a lot out there. And I know if you just like turn on a podcast or, you know, if you're wearing one of those things that measure, well, our watches do that now a lot, like measure your blood pressure. And if you looked at it before you listened to the podcast and like in the middle of it, you might be like, wow, I think I have a problem. Because it's a lot, it's very stressful. And one of the things I just want to say to all of you is that when we speak to you today, we are not judging things in terms of, like, I actually don't live in a world that I think like all is bad or all is good. I'm a very like, what is the research telling us? And we're not going to stand up here and say, throw it all away, right? But if you look at how many of you stood up and sat down, there's a lot of places where that's what's happening. We start out with this curriculum like, that's just not working, so we'll just switch it up. Or this isn't working, we're just going to shift in that way. And so our poor teachers, and in turn then the poor children that sit in front of them, are sort of victimized by this quick shift that we are constantly doing around different curricular resources or a full curriculum. And so we know we need to have them, and we know from all of the things that you just portrayed and the way that you showed us the kind of work you've been doing, this is very active. And so we know we need them, we know we need to keep working on the selection process, and that it's going to take some time and effort. So then we also know, when we think about robust resources, another new section in the essentials, again, even if it's things we spoke about in our professional learning in this network, it wasn't in like a document written in black and white or, green, layers of green and black here. But that you need these enabling conditions, right? And so when we think about the beliefs and the values, and when we look at the bullets of that section, when it talks about there are wide-ranging conditions that enable children to thrive in all school subjects and domains, including literacy. And that's another piece. This isn't just literacy. We're focused on literacy, but this is global, right, in any domain. And so we want to make sure there's that asset orientation, which connects back to all the things we've been talking about this morning with our English learners that are in our classrooms, our multilingual learners that are in our schools, those positive relationships, and really for children to be able to not only embrace their identities, but for their classrooms, their teachers to embrace their identities, and for there to be that just culture of mutual respect, and also just like we're all important here, right? And so those conditions are really, really important. And so this piece of adding cultural relevancy, being responsive, sustaining pedagogical approaches, which we continue to learn about, that's quite important, as are just acknowledging that we're human beings, right? And we need some time to play and get up and move around. And self-care looks different for an adult in some ways than it looks for children, but we need to give children time in our classrooms to make sure that they do get a break or do get space. And so if we think about sometimes fidelity, when people think about that, is you might have seen some practices that you feel bad for kids because a child has to, like a story that was sad, as a kindergarten teacher in a building I was coaching in came up and said, the spelling inventory, I got it done, said I had to have it done, but the third day of school, kindergarten, third day of school, kindergarten, had to have the spelling inventory done. Actually, it was the second day of school. She said, I had like 5 kids crying, and I was like, you just need to power through this because we need to get this done. And I was like, okay, so blame me. Anytime kids are crying, that data is so invalid, like you're not gonna get anything out of that data that you're collecting right now. You might as well rip it up and throw it away. So blame me and say, have whoever it is that's your supervisor call me, and I will fully stand behind you and say, like, you stop assessing a child when they're crying. Anytime, always, okay? But it said we're supposed to do that today. And so these are the types of kind of mental minefields that we get into sometimes when we have to implement a new resource. I mean, it probably seems like I'm making that example up, but it truly 100% is a real example and recent within the past 5 years. So, okay, yeah, so I mean, not great, okay? And so, probably talking too long on that, but just knowing that we really want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on these organizational practices as well that weren't in the first suite of the essentials that we had that are available now for our work. And so thinking about our essentials and where we were when we think about like alignment in the past to where we are now. I pulled out a couple of examples for us. So this is the version 1. That's our old cover, which is still in my head like what I picture because that's what we had for so long. And a couple of things we would talk about. You want to have resources, things you look to. So we would talk about a practice guide, for example. The What Works Clearinghouse practice guides, great places to look for instructional practices to guide your work. We had work that we did with MDE, where we had professional learning around Dr. Walpole's book that was co-hosted in 2018. And it was like, this is a research-supported professional book that can support instruction in the classroom that could be used, depending on where you are, of what you need for your class, Tier 1 or Tier 2, or sometimes Tier 3. So those were some things we had. And then within the modules, that you've all been through and you've done all these pieces, when we were designing that, one of the things we had talked about so much when Nell and Tanya were speaking and Laura were speaking and I was sitting where you are in 2016 for the first one, I'm thinking, yes, like how do we invite people to say, I'm just gonna abandon this practice or I'm gonna tweak this practice. And so we have this not a worksheet, but it's like a reflection sheet that's within the modules that when I was designing those pieces, I was like, trying to like hand that out, like, yes, you should be saying, what am I gonna throw away? What am I gonna keep? What am I going to revise? And so those pieces still remain important. But we know so much more now, thinking about what we just talked about, is that there are other pieces that we've added in that are much more transparent and that are visually able to be seen within our new essentials document, that we're not only just considering. Even in our learning, we would be learning about literacy, we'd be thinking about some of the culturally relevant pieces, but not in the same way that we're trying to be so transparent about that now. And we have some new books to support the learning that we can do, including the 2 by Dr. Muhammad. So we have Cultivating Genius and Unearthing Joy, which didn't exist in the past. So we think about, we have some frameworks to guide the ways in which that we are more culture responsive and supporting that type of pedagogical approach for children that we're serving. And coaching teachers to be able to consider those things as we're doing that work. And then when we think about Dr. Walpole's book for how to plan for differentiated reading instruction, that's a specific, set of lessons that you do sequentially, versus when we did our book study with Dr. Lindsay's work, that book is literally about swapping out things that don't align to research or don't work. If this isn't working, check this out in the book and you can swap it and do this instead. Both of those happen to be grounded in foundational skills instruction, and they're both texts that you have study groups around, so I chose them. I could have chosen a lot of other resources, but thought those are ones that seem to be used still in the field and kind of represent the holistic, like this is a scope and sequence of lessons to follow, versus here's a set of things you might just look at your curricular resources that you have and swap some things out that aren't working. So in terms of being so thoughtful about the works we're doing, this goes back to, we watched Nell this morning do the core commitments video, and it really resonated with me when I was reviewing Dr. Walpole's article again, because we've been planning for a while, but this piece in her article where she said, new in the mix for me is that effective professional learning must include direct attention to equity. Positioning race and racism within a coach's adaptive work, along with addressing other beliefs and attitudes about teaching and learning, will be worth the initial discomfort. And I think that a little bit speaks to some of the things that Dr. Regan was raising, and then also thinking about the work that we're doing all the time. It's hard work, it's tough work, but it is worth it because the children that we are trying to serve by the work we do with teachers is important. So today we're talking a lot more at you than we will for the rest of the week. This is like our overarching intro, how this hopefully will connect with you and make sense in the work ahead for what we are going to do. And I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Tortorelli now.
Okay, so we're going to start by just talking about some of the terms that float around in the ether and the podcast on Facebook that we want to make sure we all have sort of a shared understanding of. So we're going to start by but we're going to do this as a game because it's the end of a long day. How many of you have played Connections on the New York Times game site? Raise your hand if you've played. This is my new favorite thing. I was really into Wordle for a while, but now I'm into Connections. And so this is how it works. They provide you with usually 16 words every day. And you have to decide what the categories are. There's 4 categories of 4 words in the grid of 16 words. And there's usually an easier and a harder category. And there's always words that have multiple meanings and that could fit in more than one category. And so every day there's 16 new words and you have to figure out how they have grouped them. Now, in Connections on New York Times, there is a right way to group. I will say with our words, there's not necessarily one right way to group. It's more about thinking about what these terms mean to you and how they make sense together. So we've provided you with Post-its on your table. So go ahead and split those up and write one of these terms on each Post-it. So it didn't update. I don't know why. I guess they must have pulled it. So the Jamboard might not match exactly. They must have pulled it this morning and it didn't update. Oh, okay. But that's good. Okay, and if you're on Zoom, you have a Jamboard. It might not perfectly match this, we're realizing. It might say evidence-based practices instead of scientifically based reading research. All right, so write one term on each Post-it, or if you're on Zoom, use the Jamboard. And once you have written these on your Post-its, organize them into groups of 4. Discuss with your table what these terms mean to you, and then discuss how you think they would go together. They're in 4 groups of 4. Okay. There were some really rich conversations happening around these words. I just want to highlight that when you play the game on the New York Times, there is a right answer, but the reason that it's challenging is that all words have multiple meanings, right? And depending on what context, the word hustle, for example, could belong to like a category of different types of dances, or it can belong to a category of words that mean like to cheat or steal or trick, right? And so, or to hurry, or, like there's all different words have different contexts and different meanings. So there is not a right answer, but here's how Annie and I thought about organizing it, all right? So we put together the words curriculum, high quality instructional materials, intervention, and curricular resources as what? As like the materials that you might hand to a teacher or that a teacher might get, right? You can have intervention materials, you can have high quality instructional materials, curriculum, or curricular resources. As we go forward, we're going to be using that term curricular resources as sort of an umbrella term, just like phonological awareness is an umbrella term, because that can include both whole ELA curricula, like a Basel reader, like Wonders or Reading Street or Into Reading or something like that, but can also include smaller things like foundations, right? A curricular resource that is brought in for just one thing, used for just one area. So I thought of those things. We thought of those things as the what. Then the pink highlighted words here, grade level, opportunity, achievement, and equity are the why, right? What are we trying to do? We're trying to give kids access to grade level content and experiences and texts, opportunities to learn and grow, supporting their achievement, and in an equitable way. So those are all like reasons for doing this work. The green teal words we thought of as being the how. And so that includes things like evidence-based practices or scientifically based reading research that tells us how to do these things, the objectives that we're trying to achieve in any given lesson, the explicit instruction that kids need to learn these things, and the standards that you're working towards in these materials. So we also saw those as grouped under how. And then the red we saw as grouped as terms that they can mean very, very different things in very different contexts. So I called these watch out, right? These are terms that have a lot of baggage that come with them, and that can mean different things to different teachers and to different administrators, and can be a little bit fraught. So it's not that you can never use these terms, but they're terms that we need to be careful how we use and who we use them with to make sure we're all on the same page. So evidence-based, for example. I love evidence-based reading instruction. Everything I do is about evidence-based reading instruction, teaching teachers how to do it, developing curricular resources to support it, studying what works and what doesn't. But during the Reading First era and still today, there's been this tendency to just stamp it on materials, right? And to use that and like sort of torture that term to the point where it doesn't always mean what we think it means, or it doesn't have as much meaning as we wish that it did. So that's something to be careful around. The science of reading is very quickly approaching that same spot where it means different things to different people and is not as useful a term as we would like, not a shared understanding of the concepts as we would like. Reading first, obviously, we've already dug a little bit into some of that baggage, what it means to put reading first as opposed to, all kinds of like diverse literacy experiences, as well as the legislation and the history there. So those are all terms that we want to be careful about. And then the word fidelity, and Mary had a really good point about the word fidelity, that she said she would share with the group. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Testing. Okay, sorry about that. I don't like to use mics that much. No, I'm kidding. You want to sing? Alrighty, I'm Mary Johnson from Muskegon Area ISD, and I was sharing with Dr. Tortorelli as well as Annie as she was walking by. with the word fidelity. We have one of our school districts that is in a pilot year with Dr. Nalduk's Great First 8. So we were super excited because I've been spending the month of June with teachers in kindergarten that are going through the 30 hours of training. And one thing they lifted is that word that continually populated for them was integrity. They didn't have fidelity, and they're coming from a program that was fidelity. They felt like they were constantly coming in with checklists to say they're not doing this, they're not doing this, they're not doing this, and this was from the group there. So they like that word integrity because it feels like we get to try things on together and do this for the benefit of the children. And then the last 3 days I've been with administrators, and I noticed Dr. Nalduk with the administrators kept using that word integrity versus fidelity too. So it's just a really nice way to think about that word. I've tried to use it with a couple of districts to kind of say, so when you say fidelity, do you really mean integrity? And then we start having conversations about those words. Sometimes successful, and sometimes everybody's clinging to that word fidelity. So that's just.
Thanks, Mary.
Yeah,
Appreciate you.
thank you. Yeah, fidelity can mean just doing what's on the page, exactly as it's written. But I know Annie has a really cool way of thinking about this too, right? Thinking about fidelity to curriculum versus fidelity to
The children that sit in front of you. So that's always what I think about. Like, who do we have fidelity to? So if if you know that the children in your class don't need a particular lesson because you have evidence that they have mastered a skill, like, why spend that time teaching something they already know, right? However, if you know that there's a skill they still all need, but it's already something that you've done, you might need to like tuck that in again, or teach it to them in a different way, or help them understand it differently. And if we think too tightly around the word fidelity, then we're just putting too much sort of hope and faith in curriculum designers who are designing something for a global audience. They don't know your school, they don't know the children that are sitting in front of you, and it comes back to that, like, you have to have this spelling inventory done on day 2 of school when you have 5 kids that are crying in kindergarten, right? Like, that doesn't make sense. That's not the humane way to teach. So we just want to help you think about it. And your term that I like, though, was it a fidelity hangover? What was
yes,
the
fidelity hangover. A lot of teachers just kind of clench up and bristle at that term because it's really is associated with prior experiences where their professional autonomy and judgment wasn't respected, right? And we don't want to get lumped in, anything that we're trying to get them to do, we don't want it to be lumped in with those experiences. So it's not that you'd never use this word. I do intervention research. We use the term fidelity in the research, but it's not necessarily a term we use with the teachers because we actually are much more interested in finding out how they're adapting the things that we create to meet the needs of their students. That's actually part of the research question. But of course, so that it's really a research term that crept its way into instructional materials and may or may not really belong there. Thank you for engaging in that activity with me. Connections is a new game on the New York Times Games website, so go check that out if you are a New York Times game player. But what we wanted to do now is just provide a couple of examples of curricula misalignment or difficulties that arose that we've worked with in our own experience. So I just want to highlight, Annie said this earlier, but I want to highlight the caveat. Usually in research and with researchers and in papers, researchers shy away from using the names of the curricula or saying good or bad things about any curricula because we don't see it as our jobs to sell things or denigrate things, and we don't want to get sued and that kind of thing. And so I want to say that we are not advocating for or against any particular curricular resources or products, but we are using some of the names just because that's how it's going to make the most sense to you. So even though we'll be highlighting some of the difficulties that we've had or that we've seen teachers have with particular curricular resources or some of the research alignment problems with particular curricular resources, that's not to say you should or shouldn't use it. In fact, we understand that sometimes you don't get to pick what your districts are using, right? Sometimes you get to have some influence and sometimes you don't. But oftentimes, you're already deep into a curriculum with a group of teachers, and that's not going to change. And so our work together is really about highlighting areas where your work is needed and valuable within a particular curricular resource, rather than picking or rejecting or trying to rank curricular resources. So I just wanted to say that. We are not selling anything, nor are we like banning anything. That's not what we're here to do. So we'll talk specifically about different types of resources just to provide context and examples, but again, not endorsements or refutations. So Annie's going to start by talking about her experience working with a Wonders curriculum, and just highlighting some of the issues that arose with that curriculum.
And so my lens is around coaching with Wonders. And so, you know, there's not always an opportunity, even when we think about literacy leadership teams as outlined in the organizational practices, right? You don't always get a seat at the table. I did not have a seat at that table with, you know, I supported 8 districts. It's not a blame thing. There was one of me and there were 8 schools and 2,400 square miles, right? So they might have thought, Annie doesn't have time to do this for us. I would have made time, absolutely made time. But, you know, they selected a curriculum. And so they selected Wonders, and the literacy coach in the building said, I think we need a lot of help with writing. Would you be willing to come and do a professional learning with me? And I was like, I would love to do that. So we co-planned some curricular, we wanted this to be, we as coaches, right? You might look at something and think, oh, wow, okay, so, okay, and you need to sit with that when you look at something and think this is not aligned, right? And it wasn't that none of it was aligned when I looked at the writing, but I was like, this is going to be a little tricky. But I also wanted to find out what the teachers thought of it with the coach I was working with, and I also wanted them to have the teachers to have some context. So we read this very short article by Steve Graham, who, you know, is like the literacy, the writing guru, does, you know, he's done his meta-analyses on writing, he does so much research on writing, and he had this very short article, it's very teacher-friendly in ILA Today. And so I said, you know, to this coach, what do you think about using this article? It was just a 2-pager, do's and don'ts of writing instruction. They could read it within like 5 to 7 minutes. So we had a series of lunch and learns, and the first one was, hey, let's just all read this article and have a grounding experience. And we read this writing do's and don'ts. And in the meantime, the coach and I, of course, had planned a lot prior to this lunch and learn that we had. And so we had looked through the do's and don'ts. And then, you know, I said to her, what do you think about bringing the essentials into this? And she's like, yes. So then what we did is we made this grid where we had, oh, you're not seeing it though. Do you mind? No, it's totally my fault. So this is my bad. So we had what he said about the do's on the left side, right? And then on the far right side, these were the connections to, again, we're thinking about the Essentials first edition, okay? Because this was happening, we started planning in 2019, and this was happening actually in January, February of 2020, which, like, we know what happened after that, right? So, interesting time, but anyhow, on the far right side would be the Essentials connections. So some of these teachers had done Essentials training with me, some of them had not, and we were doing it with K-5 teachers. And so their job was to read the article, read what Steve Graham had, right? So it said, do encourage students to write for multiple purposes. So we thought, hey, that's really well connected to Essential 1, Bullet 4. That's also very well connected to Essential 6, Bullet 4. And we really want kids to have meaningful opportunities to write. How do you feel about that? And so we had each teacher complete this. Like my first grade brain always goes to like a stoplight, like green, yes, it does this, you know, red, like no, and yellow, like kind of in between. So the teachers had to rate it and then talk as a group. And the coach and I had already rated this, and we already knew like what we felt about these things. And it was really interesting because we needed it to be very organic, and I needed to kind of know like what the relationship was with the teachers to this. And it was so interesting because having known who I had done some training with the Essentials on, and having known who I hadn't, many of the teachers who had never done any training on the Essentials were like, it totally is green. Yeah, it's great, you know. And the teachers that had done Essentials training were like, I just am so uncomfortable teaching any of this writing piece right here. And I don't like that they're inauthentic examples of text and that they already give you one and the teachers aren't writing with the kids. They're just taking an example of a text and they're just putting it up as an example of a text. It's not that it's terrible, but we know that what teachers could be doing is going through the writing process with them and using strategies like interactive writing, for example, to be modeling what you could be doing to write your own writing and then inviting children to write their own piece instead of everybody writing the same thing or everybody always writing to a prompt. And so, again, it's not that it's terrible, but there were tweaks that needed to be had, but we had work to do. And so we're going to get into this over the next few days. But that was the problem that we ran into when we started to do this, is that not only did we find some misalignments, but we also found a lot of differences in teacher beliefs about a curricular resource in the same grade level. And so as a coach, it's a little challenging. So you might think about that, like what would you have done if you were Annie and Coach A? And we'll be sharing some more about this over the next few days. And to know, I don't have a magic, ball. And also then a pandemic started and closed schools down as we were in the midst of our Lunch and Learn series. But, just food for thought. And we'll get back to this and talk a little more about where we went with this project over the next few days.
Well, and so sometimes that's something that you're going to run into, right? It's like you know the research really well, you're very steeped in the essentials, and you happen to be working with a district with a curricular resource that you don't think aligns well with what you know from research, right? That's going to happen. But I wanted to share an opposite example, which is what happened in East Lansing. So in East Lansing, we ended up adopting bookworms, which is Sharon Walpole and Mike McKenna's reading curriculum. This started last fall in my son's elementary school when he was going into 3rd grade. And this was the end result of a very long process in which the coaches themselves had taken recommendations from the ISD, had gone around and observed other districts using different curriculum, and had actually narrowed it down to 2 choices before we even formed the committee. And so we spent a whole school year as a committee evaluating 2 choices. Here's the timeline here. Evaluating just 2 curriculum that were the 2 finalists that they had already narrowed down to. 8 or 9 teachers piloted each curriculum and gave feedback, and they observed the teachers piloting. I mean, and we had so much information about these curriculum. We sat in groups and grade level groups and reviewed the curriculum. I myself actually put together a little review of research on the 2 curriculum. Now, I'm not going to say what the other one was because bookworms won that particular matchup, so I feel a little bit bad. But basically, I went through all the research studies that had been done using both curricula and kind of tallied up how many students it had been studied with and the research evidence for the efficacy of the curriculum. So we really felt like we had done our homework. And when we started implementing bookworms in the fall, we felt pretty good. But the problem that we immediately ran into is that it's not just about research alignment. As Bridget said earlier, it's not just about high-quality instructional materials. It's also about what's important to your local context and district. Something that's very important to the East Lansing School District is equity and diversity. And making sure that all of our students can see themselves in the instructional materials, that nobody feels left out, that we have modern, diverse texts with interesting illustrations. And that is not actually a strength of Bookworms. Bookworms uses a lot of classic texts that have been that are free, easy to access, not very expensive, right? Some of them are in the public domain even. And Bookworms has been around for a while, so it's been using some of the same texts that I used when I was teaching reading, like Morris the Moose and things like that. And they're lovely, but they're not necessarily what East Lansing teachers wanted for their students. So that we immediately ran into just a lack of diversity in the books themselves. Now, one of the great things about Bookworms is that it does use a lot of text reading, like they're reading authentic texts all the time. But if those authentic texts aren't the right one for your district, if there's a mismatch there, that's a problem. In addition, teachers immediately found some texts that they didn't want to teach at all. They thought they were problematic and had some issues because they were older or outdated. There were some issues with, like, say, language around fat phobia and that kind of thing that they didn't appreciate. And so that issue came up right away. And so we'll talk about how we dealt with that issue. But in addition, as teachers got into the materials, there were a lot of teachers who weren't ready to let go of certain practices that they had gotten really comfortable with over the years. They understood intellectually, for example, that they weren't going to be using leveled texts anymore, but not emotionally. That didn't feel right to them, and they kept looking for reasons to kind of creep those back in, right? Same thing with the high-frequency words and the flashcards, right? If the kids didn't appear to be learning the high-frequency words at the pace that they wanted, the flashcards kind of crept back out, right? And so there were lots and lots of things that we weren't really ready to let go of because of the practices that had been in place for so long. So even when there's a high alignment with research evidence, sometimes there can be mismatches in your district with other values and experiences. And so that really, so that came up, and this whole last year was working with the coaches to support teachers in thinking in new ways about these things, and also addressing some of the issues that made the curriculum not a great fit for East Lansing. So basically, yeah.
There's something you had shared something I thought was powerful from Dr. Walpole about why they can't just immediately stop.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So I happen to know Dr. Walpole, and so you know, a situation emerged where the literacy coaches ended up on the phone with Dr. Walpole to express their concerns about the books, and things got a little testy. And what she explained is that she is aware of, you know, that there are newer books that she would like to include, but all of those nice research studies that I shared with you were conducted using the existing curriculum. So if you swapped out all the books at once, all the research evidence would no longer be valid, right? So it's a slow, iterative process where you replace a few books every time there's an update, so that you can test the new version and make sure you're not just throwing everything out. So yes. It's not that Bookworms is not aware of this problem, it's just that it's an older curriculum and it has to be updated slowly over time to maintain the research integrity. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. But yeah, it was a very funny conference call. So basically, when talking about these things, Annie and I have identified 3 big buckets of potential areas of misalignment. There's misalignment with research, but also with our equity goals, and also local instructional context and culture. So it's not just as simple as picking one perfect curriculum. In fact, the thing that we said a lot during our curricular meetings is that there is no perfect curriculum. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the pre-existing curriculum rubrics in the next few days, and what they're good for and what they're not as good for. And talking about how very few of them actually put together the things that we care about, right? That actually align with the literacy essentials, that are designed for implementation and coaching support rather than just picking a curriculum, and that put research and equity together into one place. We also know, we don't have really time to talk about this today because it's already 3:20, but or 3:18. But we also know that there is this wonderful curriculum wonderful resource examination tool that has been created, but it's really designed more for professional books that support teachers, right, rather than the materials that they're teaching with. And so there's a little bit more work to do. So what we are planning to do for the next couple of days is to work together to start creating our own review tool that can help you identify these areas of misalignment where your teachers could use support, and use for existing curricular resources rather than assuming you're going to throw everything out and get to start all over, so that you could identify the gaps where teachers might need some support. And then over the next year, identify those gaps, problem solve and coach on the gaps, and create and share resources among the group that can help us do that work. So for tomorrow, you're going to read Dr. Walpole's article. We're going to come back and reflect on current curricular resources and enabling conditions, and we're going to start collaborating and creating our own resources. In the meantime, do we have time to do our closing activity, or do we need to skip to? Do they need to do the reflection?
No. So you want me to tell them? Yeah.
Okay. So we have one last activity. Sorry, I was doing the wrong slides. But anyway, so yes, make sure you take an article with you so that you can read that for tomorrow, and we'll come back together. Today, to finish out our day, we have a closing activity, which is 4 corners. So we have 4 posters in the 4 corners where you can go walk around, mix with some new people who weren't at your table, and think about, make notes about, for us, so as we can think about as we're planning, about what excites you about this journey for the year, what challenges do you anticipate, what questions do you have, and what else you would like us to know. So if you can go around and fill those out. Yeah, here, and Annie will let us know what to do. And you're gonna wrap up.
I'm so sorry. Thanks, Laura. Just because we want you to be able to leave after you've done this part, and so I have a quick memo about that. So just as Laura said, so we have like 4 places in the room you can put Post-its on, and give us feedback. We're going to look at those, okay, so that we get information from you, like what do you want us to know, your questions, what's exciting for you, what do you anticipate as challenges. When you do leave this room, Liberty kindly put up signs, please take everything with you because we can't leave anything in the room. And the last thing is we do want people, so I'm going to ask you, we're going to give you some time to do the 4 corners and try and talk. And at some point, oh, see, I'm doing the same thing. At some point, we would like for you to think about connecting our work with the work of Dr. Muhammad and have you be considering how the work we did today helped shape your identity. Think about skills that may have been enhanced of yours today, things you're thinking about in terms of that, how this session may have developed your intellect, how this experience that we're going to go through, even if we're just launching today, you think could be helped to support the systems that you work in, the structures that you're a part of, and just really get into that criticality piece of making the world a better place, as Dr. Muhammad has said with us, and how this session might bring you joy. So we invite you to think about those and jot those thoughts individually in your journals. And then as you close today, we, again, are just asking for your feedback on Post-its on these charts that we'll give. So that's it. We actually aren't going to have anyone fill out. There's no like Google form to fill out today. It's more just the self-reflective form for you. Maybe there's a new change. Hi, Lisa. No. Thank you. Okay, if you are from Oakland schools, we'd like you to please go to the Lakes room after you're done in our room today. So we have until like 3:30, but we're trying to give you all these directions so that you can just do your thing and then leave when you're done and get in conversation. So if you're Oakland, you're going to go to the Lakes room. We're going to be in here putting things on the 4 corners. If you're online, you have a Jamboard to put your ideas for us to reflect on, and then take some time to do your reflections in terms of Dr. Muhammad's work. And lastly, if you are a person who was going to do any video work, if you could stay in this room when you're finished so that we can meet and chat about that. So we're here. We appreciate you. Thank you for being with us and for your patience with some of the little technical pieces. And we look forward to our year of work with all of you.
I was like, you actually